Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper. Today I'm talking to you about the middle school science test for Praxis 5440. We're going to go through some specific questions for each content category, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks to pass this exam. Let's get started. So this is part 2 of our middle school science series. If you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend you go back and watch that. It's linked up in the description, but you can also find it on the channel. In that video, I go through the test specification, the blueprint, the guiding questions, and all the overarching themes for this test. In this video, I'm going to talk specifically about questions that align to each content category. So let's review just really quickly the blueprint here. So remember, we're going to have 6 content categories on this exam. We're going to have the scientific inquiry, methodology, techniques, and history. That's content category 1. So it's going to be all about, the scientific method, safety, equipment, things like that. And there are 15 questions for that part of the exam. That's 12% of the test. Then we get into basic principles of matter and energy. So that's going to be atoms, solids, liquids, and gases, what happens when you boil water, evaporation, condensation, things like that, okay? Usually that's attached to the physics or physical science, but because we're moving up in the grades, they start to, partition out more specific areas within the disciplines. So basic principles of matter and energy is content category 2. That's going to be 15 questions, also 12% of the exam. Now we're getting into the bigger parts of the exam, and we're into the physical sciences. So this is going to have to do with physics and chemistry, and that's going to be 28 questions or 22% of the exam. So when we talk about physical science, we're talking about friction, electricity, Newton's law, things like that. When we talk about chemistry, we're going to be talking about how different elements react to one another, how, mixing one chemical with another, what does that do? And we're also going to be talking about some interdisciplinary reactions. So like within our body, we have chemistry within our body. We go through cellular respiration, which involves a series of chemicals and reactions and things like that. So it's not just outside of life or outside of Earth. There are some interdisciplinary components in the physical sciences that you're going to want to pay attention to. The next content category is content category 4, which is life science or biology. Fair game in this particular content category is going to be everything from the smallest unit of life, which is the cell, and then within the cell, the DNA molecule, chromosomes, things like that, all the way out into ecosystems and the biosphere. So you're going to need to know about heredity, genes, cell division, mitosis, meiosis, chromosomes, and then also the body, invertebrates versus vertebrates, cold-blooded versus warm-blooded, circulatory systems, muscular systems, and also trophic levels and energy pyramids and food webs and ecosystems, and how all of that is interdependent on one another. You'll also need to know a lot about natural selection and Darwin and Punnett squares and Mendel and those types of things. That has to do with life science. And of course, that's the biggest chunk. That's going to be 30 questions, and that's going to be at 24% of the exam. So life science is the bulk. Then we get into earth space sciences, which is 22 questions at 18% of the exam. And with Earth space, like I said before, it's not just going to be the moon and the stars and the sun and the Earth as a planet. It's also going to be the crust of the Earth, or the lithosphere, which is going to have to do with canyons and mountains and volcanoes, earthquakes, P waves, S waves, rocks, fossils, the rock record, geologic time, things like that. So Earth space is also pretty ginormous in terms of what it covers. And then finally, the last part of the exam, a little bit smaller than the others, more along the lines of the first part, is 15 questions at 12%. And that's going to be science, technology, and society. On most upper level science tests, pretty much every science test has some questions about how we use science to better society, how we can use science to reduce pollution and reduce our carbon footprint and to make the earth a better place, and how to live longer, things like stem cell research, all the way to, pollution and reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All of that has to do with science, technology, and society and being responsible citizens. So that's going to be also on the exam. You're going to want to be familiar with that. Now let's get into some questions. I know that you guys are really into answering questions. You want to know what the questions are on the exam. Now look, I have no idea what questions you're going to get on the exam, but I have broken this down into 6 questions, so 1 per content category, so you can get an understanding of what they're going to look like on the exam. Now all of these questions came from the ETS Study Companion, so I want to be clear about that. These come from the Study Companion, and you'll be able to see the question up here, like this one is number 1 in the Study Companion. So this particular question here is all about the nature of science, or content category 1. So remember, we said nature of science, equipment, experiments, scientific method, that kind of thing. That's what this question is going to be about. Now, whenever I see something big like this, and you guys know if you've seen my good words, bad words video or my work backwards video, I like to start in the answer choices first. I like to work backwards. The reason being is if I start up here and I work my way all the way down here, I'm probably going to get confused and miss something. In my opinion, it works better to work backwards. So if we look here at A, B, C, and D, we see that each Daphnia should have its own tank. B is the length of the experiment is too long. That to me sounds like a bad answer choice because there are experiments that take decades to do. So I don't know about B. C, there are too many independent variables. Okay, I like the term independent variable, especially if this is a nature of science question because it has to do with experiments and you have dependent variables versus independent variables. So I kind of like C. And D, the sample size is too large. Okay, like an experiment being too long, a sample size can never be too large. The bigger the sample size, the better. So I'm going to be a little bit apprehensive about D, but I don't know what's going on yet. So let me just take a look. I can see that based on the answer choices, this is probably going to be an experiment type question. Let's take a look at the question stem. So again, continuing to work backwards here. Which of the following is a major flaw in this experiment? So we're looking for flaws. Well, right away, I can eliminate D and B because too long is not necessarily a flaw. Sometimes people conduct experiments from birth to 20 years old. If they're testing a group of people who were born in like 1978 to figure out, environmental factors over time, that experiment's going to take a long time. So it has nothing to do with time. And the sample size being too large, a big sample size is a good thing. So which would you rather do? Take a drug that I tested on 3 people or take a drug that I tested on 3 million people? Probably the 3 million people, right? So the sample size needs to be as big as possible in order to generalize the results. So B and D, I'm going to cross out right away. Now we have each Daphnia should get its own tank. There are too many independent variables. Now that is a flaw in an experiment because if you have too many independent variables, you're not sure what is having the effect on the experiment. So I'm going to star C. Looks like that's probably my correct answer, but let's go into the top of the question and start reading just to make sure. So we have a student performed an experiment to determine the effect of temperature and light on the feeding behavior of Daphne magna. The student placed 25 Daphnia in each of 2 identical glass bowls and then placed one bowl in a sunny, warm window and the other in a cooler, darker closet. The student measured the amount of food consumed in a week. Which of the following is the flaw? So if I were to read that from top to bottom, I would definitely have a problem because if you're not really familiar with this kind of thing, you're going to lose track and you don't know what's going on. But now that I know that I'm narrowing it down to 2 things, I want to hone in on this too many independent variables because that is a flaw in the scientific method if you have too many independent variables. Now let's go over what an independent variable is and a dependent variable. The independent variable is the thing that the scientist does to the experiment. So for example, if I'm trying to figure out if fertilizer has an effect on my flowers outside, I'm going to take some flowers and I'm going to give them the fertilizer and I'm going to have some other flowers and I'm going to not give them the fertilizer. There's only one thing that I change. The fertilizer. The soil is the same. The container that they're in is the same. The sunlight they get is the same. The amount of the temperature in the room or outside, all the same. Everything has to be the same in order for me to determine if that independent variable, that fertilizer, actually affected growth. Now, if I use some fertilizer over here and I put these guys over in the sun, I put these guys over in the dark, and I got all these different things going on, all these different variables, I don't know what is making them grow. Is it the fertilizer? Is it extra sun? Is it more water? Is it the container? That's why you have to make sure there is only one independent variable in an experiment. And here it looks like right away there are two. An experiment to determine the effect of temperature and light on the feeding behavior of Daphnia magna. So right there I've got temp and light. And then it says the student placed 25 Daphnia in each 2 identical glass bowls. That's good. And then placed one bowl in a sunny warm window and another in a cooler dark closet. Well, we've got temp and light. We need one or the other. This is 2 experiments mushed into one. So C is going to be the correct answer here. A doesn't matter. They could have their own tank or not have their own tank. That doesn't really matter. C is definitely going to be a flaw in the experiment. All right. And right there, I used some good words, bad words, backwards design that I talked to you guys about in those other videos, which I'll link up. And that works out really well here. Now, in other ones, you're not going to be able to do that for the science test, like this one. You're going to need to know the content. This is a content-driven test. So let's take a look at number 5. I always start with the answer choices. So I have, it is an alloy, it is a compound, it is an element, it is a heterogeneous mixture of elements. Okay, so first of all, I can see from the answer choices that this is probably going to be some sort of physics or matter question. We're talking about compounds and elements, periodic table, things like that. And you can see here we have a heterogeneous mixture of elements. Typically when elements are combined, they don't make a heterogeneous mixture. Heterogeneous means that they mix together and become one. So I'm going to be skeptical of that, just being a new teacher and like knowing science a little bit. I'm going to cross that off. Let's take a look at the question stem. Which of the following best describes this solid? So heterogeneous mixture is typically liquids, not a solid. So I'm right to cross off D. So we have, let's go now into the top of the question. Aluminum reacts with oxygen to form a white solid. Which of the following best describes the solid? Okay, so we have aluminum, which is an element, and oxygen, which is an element. All right, so definitely not a heterogeneous mixture. C, I can eliminate right away because they're both elements. So, when they combine, it doesn't make them an element. They're already elements. So C is out. Aluminum and oxygen are on the periodic table. So they're both elements already. Now, we have it is an alloy, it is a compound. Now, here's where you got to know your scientific content. An alloy is 2 metals coming together in a compound. So aluminum is a metal, but oxygen is not. So I can cross A off, and here we have compound. Now a compound is 2 elements coming together. So compound is the right answer here. But again, I'm going to need to know the difference between an alloy and a compound. And here's where you can use the sample test questions to further your understanding. Don't just go, oh, it's a compound. Okay. Go and look at the answer explanations, but then look at your answer choices and look them up. If you don't know what an alloy is, just because it's not the answer, you should find out what that is. If it's in the answer choices, it's probably part of the exam. So you're going to want to look that up. So not only is there information in the test spec, the blueprint, the guiding questions, and the questions itself, but there's also information in the answer choices. So just because we didn't pick A doesn't mean that A isn't something that you need to go look at. So go Google alloy and you'll see that it's 2 metals, 2 metals making a compound. That's an alloy. All right. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at number 30 here from the ETS Study Companion. And you can see the word pH here. So this is going to be part of the chemistry portion of physical science. And we're probably going to be thinking about the pH scale. I'm going to look at my answer choices and I can see that these are levels on the pH scale. And it says here, at 25 degrees Celsius, an acidic solution, another clue, could have which of the following pH values? Now, there are no good words or bad words to save you here in the answer choices. You have to understand what the pH scale is. So of course, if you're looking through the study companion, you're going to want to Google pH scale, but I can tell you very quickly that the pH scale is from 0 to 14 and 7 is neutral. On this side is the acid, and on this side are the bases. Okay, now we're looking at acidic solutions. Okay, so if it's, who cares about 25 degrees Celsius? That doesn't matter here. That's extra information to confuse you. The thing that we need to know is acid. Well, if 7 is neutral and everything to the left is acid, that means anything over 7 is not my answer. So B, C, and D are not the answer. 4.0, A is the best answer here because we're looking for acids. Now, you got to know that. And that's going to be, in the test specs, but it's also going to be in the prep books and things like that. So make sure you know your pH scale, just like you're going to need to know your periodic table. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at number 8. Now, number 8 has to do with Earth space science. So content category 5, I believe. And we're talking about convergent plate boundaries. Now I have droughts, tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes. So this is part of Earth space science. It's not just about the sun and the moon and the stars. It's also about processes on Earth, droughts, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. Here is where probably good words can help you here. If we're talking about plate boundaries, convergent plate boundaries, think about what converge means. Converge. Plates are coming together, smashing together. Now it's very slow. It's not like that, where they smash together like that. I mean, over time, they're moving like, I don't know what the exact movement over time is, but I mean, it's tiny millimeters per year or hundreds of years. I don't know. I don't teach Earth space science, but I know that convergent and divergent plate boundaries have to do with earthquakes. Earth, we're talking about the Earth, plate boundaries, part of the Earth's crust. Droughts, tornadoes, and hurricanes are all related in that they are weather, whereas earthquakes are not. So here's another trick you can do. Let's say you have no idea. You're like, oh my God, I did not pay attention during, the lithosphere section in my class as a kid. But I can see that droughts, tornadoes, and hurricanes all have to do with weather, and earthquakes do not have to do with weather. Sometimes that thing that stands out as different is the answer there. So that's just a strategy you can use. Ideally, you should know, if you're going to be teaching middle school science, you need to know what a convergent plate boundary is, period. I mean, that's a big part of the science lessons that they're learning. But if you get stuck or you just like, oh my God, I forgot, A, B, and C are all related. D is the outlier. Therefore, since you can only have one correct answer, D is probably the correct answer. All right, let's go to number 7, which is bio, my favorite. My favorite thing to teach is biology. I love it. I know you guys are all asking for a biology book, and I am working on it. But the thing about science textbooks is you have to be very, 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 very careful. It's a little bit different than writing, a teaching book like the PLT or a leadership book like the SLLA or even an elementary ed general book. With this, we got to be very, very careful that we're giving the right information. So while I am awesome at teaching biology, writing a huge biology textbook is something I haven't done yet. So I promise I'm working on it, but it does take time. All right. So let's go with 7. I know right away, I see the word cells. So I want to put my life science thinking cap on, right? So I have let's take a look. I've got the answer choices here, and it's got just numbers. So I can't do much there. And I can see how many chromosomes are in a sperm cell. Well, I know sperm cells are sex cells. So let's read the question. If the skin cells of a man contains 46 chromosomes, how many chromosomes are in a sperm cell? Now, this first part of the question, the 46 chromosomes, has nothing to do with sex cells. Sperm cells are sex cells. So here's something to remember with biology. Regular cells have 46 chromosomes. Every cell in your body, besides your sex cells, has 46 chromosomes. The cells that make up your eyes, the cells that make up your hair, your fingers, your fingernails, your skin, all of it. Every cell in your body, except for the sperm and the egg, have 46 chromosomes. And on those 46 chromosomes is the genetic code. Now, I could go on and on for hours and hours about the genetic code, but this is just a short video about general science, so I will spare you that. But remember, regular body cells, or they call them autosomes, are 46 chromosomes, okay? Every human. Now, other species have 22. And I don't know the exact, you can find a chart where it's like a tulip has like 146 chromosomes. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that if you have more chromosomes in a species it's more sophisticated. It really has nothing to do with that. We have 46, other things have 146. It just depends on the type of organism, all right? Now, with sperm cells, sex cells are half. Why? Because you get 23 from mom and 23 from dad. And when those come together during conception, you get 46. That's why you get half your genetic code from mom, half your genetic code from dad. Okay? Otherwise, it would be 46, 46, and it would be 92, right? And we have 46 chromosomes. So the sex cells have 23 each. Just remember that. The sperm has 23 chromosomes and the egg has 23 chromosomes. When they come together, they make 46 chromosomes, and then they divide. And as they divide, they're dividing up. They're replicating the DNA. They're replicating the chromosomes. They're going through meiosis and mitosis. And that's another whole section, mitosis and meiosis. But for this question, all you need to know is sex cells have half the chromosomes as a regular cell. So the sperm has 23 chromosomes and the egg has 23 chromosomes. When they come together, they make 46. So the answer is B. All right. And our last question has to do with content category 6, which is the science, technology, and society. This one's kind of lame. It's pretty easy. But it is an example of why we need to understand, what petroleum, natural gas, and coal are, because we use those in our everyday lives. These are B, fossil fuels. And typically on this part of the exam, fossil fuels are bad. Now, I know there's a lot of political debate about, fracking and fossil fuels and whether we should keep coal or not keep coal. Bottom line is, when we burn fossil fuels, it goes up into the atmosphere and it causes issues with CO2 levels. So on this exam, and I don't want to get into a political argument about it, the science backs that up, and I believe in science. The fossil fuels are always going to be a component on content category 6. So you're going to want to make sure you're cognizant of reducing fossil fuels, figuring out ways to use renewable resources like wind, solar, and air, things like that. Petroleum, natural gas, and coal, fossil fuels, definitely not renewable resources. Carbohydrates are a macromolecule found in food that we use to go through cellular respiration. Carbohydrates are made by plants. Plants make carbohydrates during photosynthesis, and biomass is not related here. So fossil fuel is the best answer choice. So I hope that helps you out today. It was a pleasure talking to you about science. Remember to look over the blueprint, the test specifications, the guiding questions, and the test questions. Remember to look at those answer explanations, employ those strategies that we talked about here, and really get to know the content in this science exam. This video, plus the video I did before, part 1, make sure you watch that as well, will really help you study for this exam, okay? If you like the content on this YouTube channel, please feel free to subscribe and hit the notifications button so you get notified when we upload new content. If you have any more questions or want me to film something else, put it in the comments below. Let us know how you're doing. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.